Well, good morning. Welcome to Sunday School. I know it looks a little bit different than it normally does. Mainly, you're there, wherever it is that you're watching this, and I'm here. And we would usually start with a game or some announcements, something to get you guys moving. Honestly, there's not a lot to announce. Here's our big announcement. Everything that's on that calendar, throw it away. Because we don't know what's going on. We know that right now the middle school retreat didn't happen, and the high school retreat isn't going to happen when we thought it would. And bubble soccer, which I was so excited for, isn't going to happen on the date that we planned it. Now, all of those things are going to get rescheduled at another time, but for right now, the calendar that we gave you, if it says March on the top of it, it probably isn't going to happen. If it says April on the top of it, it may not happen. And we don't know when we'll get back to a sense of normal as far as our calendar goes. But we're trying to give some sense of regularity, some sense of normal, something that we can hold on to. So this morning we're going to do our first digital teaching, our first virtual Sunday school. Now, if you've been here over the last couple of weeks, you know that we are starting a new series in the book of Proverbs. We started last week looking through just a few topics, and each week we'll give you guys a couple contrasting topics that the book of Proverbs gives us wisdom on. The book of Proverbs was written by a man named Solomon. He was a son of King David, and he was a king of Israel. Now, we're told that Solomon is one of the wisest men that ever lived. And the book of Proverbs was one of the books, one of the places that he wrote down some of his wisdom. And that term wisdom for us, a lot of times we hear that and we think knowledge. But in Hebrew, the term that we translate as wisdom is the Hebrew word hakmah. I know that my Hebrew professor in college is probably going to critique how I pronounce that. He's probably going to be right. But hakmah, this concept that we translate as wisdom, that we think of as just like knowledge, to the Hebrew people had a lot deeper meaning. It was a lot more of like a practical skill that was being applied. The hakmah denotes action. So it could be better described that the book of Proverbs is giving us applicable skills that we could apply to our life. And there's a lot in there. Solomon had a wealth of knowledge and information, a wealth of wisdom, a wealth of applicable skills that we could apply. That he shares through this book. This morning we're going to look at a couple different topics that he talks about through this book. And I'm going to contrast his wisdom he gives us against some negatives with some wisdom he gives us towards some positives. Here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to give you just a really brief overview, and then we've posted on our website and through social media a list of some questions, a list of some scriptures to read through the book of Proverbs. We're going to ask you, we're going to encourage you to get together with some of your friends, reach out to your small group leader, and gather using Zoom, using Facebook Live, Instagram Live, whatever way you want to use to discuss these things together. So, the negative things that he gives us some wisdom against that we're going to talk about this morning are injustice, laziness, and foolishness. Now, if you take even a short glance around this world, you can see an awful lot of injustice. You see a lot of things that seem unfair. You see a lot of people treated in ways that we shouldn't treat people. What should we do with injustice? How should we as believers, as followers of Jesus, respond to injustice? we live in a world that doesn't take long for us to find it. If you remember back last month, about the second week of February, we were talking about the End It movement and their attempts to shine a light on slavery. It's their attempt to try to point out and highlight an injustice going on in our world. And we could turn a blind eye and say, well, I'm so glad that's not happening to me. Or we could turn and face it and figure out ways to address the injustice. We're also going to look at what Solomon says about laziness. Now, some of you are going to feel like you're being attacked at this point. We're not meaning you specifically, but a lot of us struggle sometimes with, we call it a lack of motivation. We call it exhaustion or being tired. We call it just not knowing what else to do. Honestly, sometimes we just need to call it what it is. We're lazy. Maybe not always. We have to fight against being lazy. We're going to look at some of what Solomon says about that. And then also we're going to look at some foolishness. At any given moment, any one of us can play the fool. We're not always making the right choices. We're not always making the smartest choice. How can we avoid foolishness? And then contrasting those three concepts, we're going to look at three more that are encouraging towards positive things. The first one is justice. I don't mean John's son. But how can we act in a way that's right? How can we bring a just outcome? How can we intervene against injustice and bring a right outcome to the scenario? We, as followers of Jesus, should constantly be seeking to bring justice. One of the things that's going to take is the next thing that we're talking about, which is courage. I don't know how much courage you have in a scenario, but it's really easy to think that we're courageous until a moment that requires courage comes along. Until we're sitting in the cafeteria watching someone being bullied and picked on, and knowing that if we stand up, that maybe that bullying is going to come in our direction. Maybe we're going to be teased or mocked. And it would take a lot of courage to stand up and stop the bullying. And the final thought for today is on honesty. We like to think that we're honest people. We like to think that we don't lie. But the truth is, a lot of us struggle with being honest. When it really comes down to times that matter, some of us like to make up stories instead. Some of us like to exaggerate our exploits to make them sound better. But honesty is an important trait for us to have. Honesty is important for our credibility. It's important for our story. And it's important for how we live as people of God, as people that claim to follow Jesus. So here's what we're going to ask you to do. Head over to our social media channels. If you're watching this on YouTube, look in the comments below and the caption below, and there'll be a link to a series of questions. There'll be a link to some scriptures to look through in the book of Proverbs, and also some questions to interact with and to discuss. We're going to ask you again, grab a few friends, reach out to your small group leader, use the Zoom app, use Instagram Live, use Facebook Live, use whatever way you want to interact with this lesson, to challenge yourselves in these areas, to see how well you do, to see where you can grow. We're looking forward to learning all these new things in a very digital time. We're looking forward to interacting with you guys virtually, and we're really looking forward to getting back together But until then, we hope that you're able to find some wisdom, to find some depth, to challenge yourself, to grow in your faith. And we hope to see you soon.